42.
And we're live. You keep messing up my counting. You know I only have so many fingers and toes.
It's
All
so
right. So, hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just three nerdy veterans geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. So, without further ado, we're going to introduce you to the reason we're here today. And it's not Cisca as much as her booze-addled mind wants us to think it is. We're here to talk to Calvin Fisher.
Hey guys,
thanks for my counting. I had to get it. So, Calvin, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, for sure. I'm originally from Plymouth, Minnesota, just a small little suburb by Minneapolis. Moved out to Denver, so out here in the Rockies now. Love writing, love video games, love just being outdoors. Just wrote and published my debut novel, Northfield. So that's a lot about me.
Awesome. Do you have a friend named Hobbs? You need a best friend named Hobbs.
You'd be surprised at how often I get that question. And every time I get asked, I just wish more that I had a friend named Hobbs.
You need to get a dog and name the dog or cat Hobbs so you can say yes.
That's a good idea. I need to write that one down.
Or he could, just make a new character and call him Hobbs and go, my best books are about Hobbs.
There you go. A lot of writers say their characters are their best friends, right? So I feel like that would work right into that.
All right. So the next part of the introduction is rather simple. We would ask the host, that would be me, and or Cisca and I, if we want to be all proper, how we met them. But since we actually first found him when his press agent reached out to us, so easy peasy, we had an interview. So now, Cisca, you get to ask him the most important question to determine whether we finish this interview or not.
Do you like pineapple on your pizza?
No.
If that's going to end the interview, I don't know how to answer that. But no. I figure I'll be honest and say no. I'm not a huge pineapple.
He gets to stay.
Oh, well, JR loves you. But actually, what I meant was, what I should be asking you is Star Trek, Star Wars, or Firefly. Which one's your religion?
I like Star Wars the best out of those. I just like, the classic fight of good or evil that Star Wars presents. It's hard to beat. They just do it the best. So I'd have to go with that one.
Okay, then how about fantasy-wise? So Harry Potter, Game of Thrones, Forgotten Realms, or
Lord of the Rings.
Game of Thrones. Or Lord of the Rings. I can read.
I think I'd have to say Lord of the Rings for similar reasons, just sort of the struggle presented between good and evil. That's pretty cut and dry. Game of Thrones can be a bit murky, and Harry Potter was just never one I got into, which is sort of weird because it sort of was my generation was the huge Harry Potter craze. But I think I'd have to go with Lord of the Rings.
I can understand that. I read the last book of Harry Potter twice before I remembered it.
That's fair.
So which one was your first love, sci-fi or fantasy?
Sci-fi was my first love. I actually started out as a huge comic book fan, primarily Marvel. And I think just a lot of that, the science fiction there sort of is what introduced me to liking sci-fi and chapter books and novels. So I started off with Spider-Man and sort of moved from there.
Okay.
So what would be your first memory of engaging with spec fic as a genre? Was it watching TV, playing video games? Obviously, it was not reading Harry Potter.
That's a great question. I'd say it sort of started off with while I was reading comic books. I also was a big fan of playing video games, and just through that, some of the classics in the genre like Mass Effect and Fallout and those things sort of wanted me to get more into reading some of the speculative sci-fi classics too.
Okay. So what is it about speculative fiction as a genre that you love?
I think it's a great way to sort of explore different moral questions that are kind of hard to look at in our daily life. I think it can just present a lot of situations that you really have to think about and just wonder. And it gives a great way to sort of reflect on our current society. And besides all that, it's a great way to escape. I mean, who doesn't want to spend a little bit of time in a world where people are blasting up aliens with laser guns? It's kind of a hard thing to beat.
Well, we do love our blasters on this podcast. So
Indeed. So how did your love of speculative fiction as a genre transition into you writing stories in it?
I would say I've always been passionate about writing. When I was a little kid, I would actually make homemade comic books and go around the neighborhood selling them to pretty much anyone who would buy them. So pretty much it kind of went hand in hand. So once I became interested in the speculative fiction genre, that also was around the same time that I wanted to start writing in that genre as well. Because when I was really into thrillers, that was another genre I was pretty into writing. As you can see, it sort of follows what I'm usually reading and interested in. I want to write too.
That makes sense.
Okay. So many authors let their own real life experiences influence the stories that they tell. So were there any specific formidable moments that shaped you as a storyteller?
I would just say I was pretty fortunate to have a good upbringing, and I think that informed a lot of the values that I bring into my novels. I really strive to write stories that are wholesome with messages that are positive, because there's a lot of darkness to be found these days. So I just want to bring some of that positivity and sort of good values.
That's awesome. I definitely agree with you on that one. It's much better to be, if you can find stuff to be positive about, that's the best part to focus on. But transitioning a bit away from the writing side, talking about things from a fan angle, I know you boldly published at a time when there were no fans to be seen because everybody was hiding. Thank you for the disease that shall not be talked about today. But so you have yet to have your first fan experience. How do you think are you ready?
It's a bit tough to say. I'm really excited. I think once I sort of get my first fan drawing, that's what I'm most excited about, is getting just some drawing or art from a fan. First thing I'll do is just share that everywhere I possibly can, first with friends and family. But sort of, I was saying, the comic book background, a lot of drawings and stuff really appeal to me. So I think above all, that's what I'm excited for.
That you think that's when the moment of I've made it will sink in for you?
Yeah, I think for sure that's when it'll finally hit me.
And what are you going to do to celebrate?
I think besides just running up and down the streets, just waving it around,
I think that's awesome.
Yeah, probably just print it out and put it on my wall, I'd say. So, yeah.
I think that's wonderful. I really look forward to it. You will have to, when you get that first one, you'll have to come and share it in our Facebook group so we can all enjoy it with you.
I'd love to do that.
I love seeing it when authors succeed. So
thanks. I'll do that for sure.
So we're here to talk about everything you've written. And have you written other things? Can you give us the highlight reel of your body of work?
Yeah, so Northfield is my first published work, published in November of last year. Besides that, though, I've been writing novels for about, since 2013, 14, so coming up on 8 or 9 years. So through that, I've written a whole bunch of novels, just sort of honing my craft and really getting ready to publish the first one.
Exciting.
So were there any short stories and anthologies? Because some people forget to count those, or published articles in newspapers when you were in school, anything like that?
Not really. I was always pretty focused on writing novels. That's where my attention sort of rests. Never been a huge short story writer, so it's been mostly writing a few novels. A thriller was my first one, followed by a few science fiction novels until we got to till Northfield.
All right, well, that narrows down the topic for tonight. So we'll talk about how you came up with the idea for Northfield. So was it psychedelics, Ouija board, overindulging in Colorado's devil's lettuce?
More than anything else, it was just a trial of a process of trial and error. It actually, the sort of inception for the novel was more of a thriller type. and just wrote a draft for that. Didn't think it worked super well, so just kept tweaking and tweaking it, and just sort of like a lightning bolt, it hit me. What if I changed the setting and themes and made it science fiction? And from there, just everything flowed. So I'd say just a combination of being in there and writing, as well as just consuming science fiction at the time, kind of made everything fall into place.
All right. Well, now we're going to talk about that glorious cover. I'm going to share that real quick. And as I bring that up, can you tell us the story of how this art came to be?
Yeah, for sure. So when I finished writing Northfield and was looking to publish it, one thing every book needs is a cover. So I just started shopping around trying to find a cover. And I came across just these amazing set of science fiction covers that were just an astronaut on this just crazy, colorful, sort of waterboard color landscape. And I just thought they were the most beautiful thing. So I reached out to the cover artist, Geoffrey Bunting, who actually lives in the UK, and just work with him, and sort of just through just talking with him and going through my book, we sort of came up with this, and this is what he designed.
That's awesome. I think in some ways, some of the most powerful covers are the ones where, when as a reader, you can go back and you can look at it and you can see how that cover really ties to the book. And that's what makes that cover just so distinctive and iconic for that series or that book. So that's awesome.
Thanks. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it turned out and how well the journey did.
So what would be your 30-second elevator pitch for this book be?
Yeah, so Northfield takes place in a world that's drowning in toxic gas. It's a really harsh, cold world. People are very insular and just focused on surviving above everything else. Mark Northfield stands as an exception. Above all, he's focused on living up to the memory and promises he made to his past wife. But in this, an adversary blackness, and neither has to choose between assassinating a man or being killed himself. Little does he know, however, that the man he is targeted to kill holds the key to saving the world.
Oh, wow. That's some pretty heavy stuff to figure out.
Yeah, he is definitely in a bind.
So what is it that makes your series special and unique in the crowded field?
So I think one of the biggest draws of my novel is the main character, Northfield. A lot of science fiction can put a significant focus of the attention on the world, and sometimes the main character can fall by the main side. So in Northfield, the main character is very central, and he has a lot of complex emotions and just situations he has to navigate that I think readers will really connect to and find really appealing.
Okay.
So, and what tropes is it? Blah, I really can't talk. What tropes did you feel Northfield hits the best, or that you decided, I'm really going to use this, or I'm really going to twist this?
So I think one of them that is pretty interesting is the concept of the raider, a very popular sort of trope you see in especially post-apocalyptic fiction. This sort of band of guys who go around stealing and thieving. There's one of them in my book, the Yellowbacks, and I think the handling of them is a little different than you see in other science fiction books. You see a little bit more of their good side in unexpected ways. I don't want to spoil too much, but if you are a fan of raiders and that sort of thing, in that part of the world building of post-apocalypse, I think you're going to be happy with it.
Oh, I think there's a whole bunch of people who are really into that kind of thing. There's an entire Mad Max thing where they do all that too, even out west. So,
So you mentioned that this was post-apoc, but do you feel like this fits in any of the other subgenres that are available on the wild, wild webs of books?
Yeah, so I think post-apocalypse is probably the most apt. I think dystopian as well. There's a lot of dystopian aspects of the book. I do think as well the broad science fiction category does fit too, just because there are a lot of different science fiction technologies that play a part in the plot and just the world that's been built and how characters interact with it.
So, what is it about the post-apocalyptic field of play that draws you?
I think a big thing that draws me is that it is, on the surface level, the most negative genre out there. It's about just the fall of humanity and just darkness in general, right? No, a post-apocalyptic book is going to start on a happy note. And I think just taking that sort of environment and finding positive things in uplifting characters and people sort of overcoming a lot of those struggles is I find pretty inspiring, at least.
So, do you prefer the dystopian or the post-apocalyptic? Because there's kind of a difference between the two.
Mm-hmm.
And where do you see the difference being, like as a reader and an author?
Right. So at least how I associate it is generally post-apocalypse. I think of just in terms of the environment. As far as the world's fallen from a state of grace, and it's something everyone realizes. Well, dystopian oftentimes is about just a lot of time an oppressor, a governmental force that's essentially taking the utopia of a society and flipping it into dystopia. So I think I gravitate more towards the post-apocalypse, just because of what I said. It can be even more negative than dystopia. But I do think, there's a lot of interplay between those two subgenres.
Okay, so let's talk about the story itself. What can you tell us about your main character? What makes him unique in the crowded world of science fiction and fantasy?
Yeah, so I think he definitely has some interesting traits. I think, first of all, what's really appealing is he has a great set of good qualities as far as he's very empathetic, really striving towards doing the right thing, has a strong moral compass, but some negative qualities as far as he's very unsure of his decisions and has trouble making them and is very indecisive at times. He also has a lot of conversations and inner monologues between God and his fallen wife, which are often humorous or often sad, depending on the situation, which you don't really see that very often with science fiction or with characters in general, I suppose, the sort of conversations he has in his head between other characters.
Okay, so secondary characters also sometimes can steal the limelight. So, do you have any secondary characters in this novel that are especially memorable?
Yeah, there's a few off the top of my head. The first is her name's Elena. She's the most, I guess, positive out of the group. She's really the spearhead who really has the most moral clarity and decisiveness in where to go. And just through that, she's a pretty inspiring light in this world of darkness. Also, her father, John, he has to navigate between supporting her and her desire to improve the world and his desire to protect his daughter. And there's really a conflict he has with that role. And then the last character is his name's Geralt Salb, and he's the leader of the Yellow Bat faction I was talking about. And there's just a lot of grayness and complexity with this character, which I don't want to get into too much as far as that goes, but I think he might be a fan favorite.
Okay, that's cool. Who's the bad guy? I mean, or is the bad guy kind of just the entire situation they're finding themselves in?
So the, I guess, antagonist you'd consider would be the network, which is this sort of dystopian type government that sort of controls what society remains. And they sort of have a monopoly on just some of the materials people need to survive. For instance, gas masks, filters, sort of filtration systems so people's homes can be free from the toxic gas. And through their sort of control of the supply of these, they have a lot of weight and ability to sort of shape the world and control people. So they're sort of one of the forces the main characters contend with.
Okay. Sorry. If your characters met you in a back alley, though, how do you think you would fare if they knew who you were.
I think they'd it'd be safe to say they'd be pretty upset with me. I think it's hard for any post-apocalyptic author for the characters to come and be like, you really gave me a great life here and a great situation you've put me in. So I think I would definitely lower my head and run away as fast as I could.
I will say I think that is a very not uncommon, maybe even a common answer for how people, authors tend to put their characters through a lot.
Sure.
But it's still our favorite one.
Yeah, so let's take a sneak peek at how the saucers were made. So were there any cool scenes or ideas that you had to cut from the final product, what you thought were kind of cool that you want to share a little bit about?
Yeah, so a lot of scenes I wrote were actually on the world before the fall, sort of in the process of falling, just the whole way that this world became this toxic gas-filled place, and sort of the final moments leading to the collapse, which I was pretty happy with the scenes, but just in the final book, just for clarity and just conciseness and having the plot move forward, they just couldn't make it in. But they definitely did inform a lot of the other parts of the book.
So do you think you're going to put that out on like a Patreon for supporters maybe, or in another book or a prequel?
Newsletter?
Or a short story for an anthology?
That's something I'm still thinking over. One of the nice or unique things about Northfield is that there is a lot of haziness about exactly how the fall of society came, which sort of relates to the toxic gas and sort of the haziness of the world there in the unsureness. So there's something I do like about that, but I also do think there's a lot of grounds to explore what happened before. So I think just if my mind changes on that, I might put something out, but no current plans.
Okay. So what can you tell us about the universe? In miniseries, the world where the story is told is as much a character as the protagonist and the antagonist. So you can give us a hint of more than just toxic gas about the world of Northfield?
Yeah, for sure. So a big thing about it is the network, which I was talking about, where they really have this control on the supplies and people's way of life. They, in a lot of ways, just advertise themselves as just a mediator between all of the different disparate groups in the post-apocalypse, but their hand is unseen, but its force is certainly felt. They're at war with the Yellowbacks, which I was talking about, as far as they're this sort of raider faction, which everyone hates, but there's some sort of mysterious circumstances as far as why they never go into the greater city. They're always sort of lurking around its peripheral. So just through that, there's a lot that characters don't know, as far as it's this world where they can't really travel too far. Otherwise, they risk, being away from their filtration houses. They can't go too far into the depths of the gas in the wilderness. So there's a lot of sense of confinement in the story.
So right now, Northfield stands alone. Will there be more from these characters? Where do you see this going?
Yeah, there is going to be a sequel. It's in progress right now, but there's more to the story than the first book. You can read the first book and get a full, complete experience, but readers should know, if they do read, that there's more to be had.
That's always exciting, because nobody ever, you fall in love with these worlds and then you're like, but that was it. So it's good to know for your fans out there that there is more. And it sounds very claustrophobic almost.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, a sense of claustrophobia certainly sort of pervades the world.
So I can tell
Oh, sorry. What were you saying?
I was going to say, I can tell when I read this, I'm going to be like sitting outside in the sun, breathing lots of fresh air.
Yeah, that's a great idea. In Denver here, they sell, just because it's so high altitude, these oxygen things to give you even more oxygen. So that might not be a bad idea either.
Goodness. Well, I think I'm pretty close to sea level, so I should be good. But I do think we have some places that sell those things. So every universe has its own internal consistent rules and science and technology that's specific to it. So what can we expect to see from that in your world?
Oh yeah, certainly a lot of labor went into just making sure everything in this world is internally consistent, just because of
fans are into those details.
Yeah, there's a lot of those details. There's some sort of secrets about the gas, which I won't spoil, but there's a lot of things where when you're reading, you might have questions about, how does this actually work? But once the reader figures out some additional details of exactly what the gas is, it just becomes pretty interesting. And I think a lot of those questions become answered. So it's one of those where the more you read, the more sort of the inner workings become apparent.
Though I enjoy those kind of books. Do you have a background in chemistry? Is that why you chose gas?
I don't actually. Although my girlfriend, when I was writing this at the time, was going through all of the organic chemistry classes and things like that in college. So I did hear about the occasional molecule and particles and those sorts of things.
So I spent a lot of time working with chemicals. So it made me very curious. Organic.
I'm not saying it was based after her, but all I'm just saying is Breaking Bad had chemistry in it too.
Yeah, but I'm not really that into organic chemistry. Biochemistry is fun. Organic was a little so synthesis stuff. Anyways, back beyond chemistry. So of all the tech in your universe that you invented, which one would you have for daily use?
So that's an interesting question, because a lot of the technology in the world was created in response to this sort of hazardous situation they find in. So a lot of it isn't too applicable. I will say what would be the coolest, though, is the sort of Network's military faction has these exoskeleton suits. And I don't know if I'd get a lot of daily use out of them, but it would, be fun to wheel around the block in a giant exosuit, although that might get a couple complaints from the neighbors if I did that.
That's fine. So
if you had that exosuit, how would you abuse that for daily use? Because I could see never having to wait in traffic again.
Exactly. There's no need for doors. You can just break down the wall. You could create so many shortcuts. Like, you could have the number of steps you have to take. So it's definitely a tool more for evil than for good, I guess. I will say.
Definitely very
Well, no,
cool.
because you're giving them fresh air, so you're actually doing them a favor by breaking their walls.
Exactly.
I'm trying to help you out here.
Claustrophobia.
Who doesn't want a little more circulation in their house?
So I gotta ask you, just was the time being in confinement and during COVID like influenced on your writing on this, or was it just a little too surreal for you?
I actually started. I finished the first draft in 2017, so a lot of the big story elements were there, and it was just sort of refinement. But yeah, when I was getting everything ready to publish in 2020, I was kind of like, gosh, everyone's just gonna think I took this from COVID and was just writing the COVID book, because the first page is about the character lamenting the mask he has to wear everywhere, and that's a little. I was like,
little too on point.
Yeah, I was like, oh man, everyone's gonna think I came out with this in 2020 and this is what I was thinking. But I guess that's how it goes sometimes.
One of my favorite series, Grave Witch, the final book came out mid 2020, and because it's TradPub, it was definitely written way before COVID was a thing, and but there's a plague in it, and it's like in the book, and I'm like, oh no, it's the second to last book in the series. Sorry, she came out with 2 in that year, but it was like, this is a little too on point. Okay.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely going back, I'm like, oh, that's a little more topical than I quite meant it to be. But
sometimes that happens, and sometimes I was rereading a classic recently, and it was like, wow, that is even more topical now than when the book was written. And the book is 15 years old, maybe. So, yeah, it was definitely. It's interesting how that sometimes happens particularly with science fiction, I think.
Yeah.
It's one of those things where life is imitating art and vice versa.
Yes, it can definitely happen. You don't have aliens in your story, but it is speculative fiction, and you're clearly a fan of it. So if you wanted to create a monster or an alien, how would you go about doing it? Would you let nature inspire you, or are we maybe there's aliens or monsters in the gas?
You never know, right? I would say one of the big things is I just like sort of the feral looking creatures with a lot of fur. So it'd probably have sort of a werewolf inspired look, or sort of like Venom from Spider-Man, just that sort of very predator look I've always been a fan of. So it'd probably be something like that mixed with electricity, just because I've always thought lightning was cool. So I think I'd been trying to learn how to draw, so it would be fun to do a couple sketches of something like that. Absolutely.
Okay, that's a good answer. So you were very pithy and on point. It helps that it's your debut novel, so don't worry about it. My attempt at my first interview was much shorter because I just sort of word mushed all of the things together. But clearly, we've asked you all the questions. So, was there anything you want to tell us about Northfield that we didn't ask you before we move on?
I think you guys got most of the things I wanted to talk about: the setting, the plot, characters, and so I don't think there's anything else.
So right now, it looks like this is only out in ebook and paperback. Correct? Is there any plans to get this in audiobook format?
Yeah, it's certainly something I'm looking into and interested in. I've gotten a number of requests for it already. Um, just waiting for the book to be out a little longer, and just see how it plays out and see if there's a real big demand for it. But it's certainly something I'm open to and willing to do.
So, in a dream world where you get to pick your own narrator and they're just going to have to say yes for reasons because, Handwavium is real, who would you pick to narrate your book?
That is a great question. Whose voice do I really like? I like Hugh Jackman's voice a lot. I think he's kind of got the grizzly nature that I think
I could see Hugh Jackman voice working really well with that cover, particularly. Yeah, and a lot of actors have moved into doing voice acting. So, one of the guys who plays one of the villains on The Mandalorian does voice acting, and the guy who plays McDreamy, now that we've proven I'm female, McDreamy from Grey's Anatomy has gotten into voice acting. So,
yeah, that's right.
Occasionally.
You scared him away, Doc. You can't do that.
Or sorry, what was that?
I said I do watch TV occasionally.
Oh yeah.
So often people are like, what do you watch? And I'm like, I read books. They're like,
I've heard great things about Grey's Anatomy, so I won't hold that against you.
So before we wrap this up, can you tell listeners how they can find you? And as usual, dear listener and viewer, because we haven't forgotten you over there on the YouTubes, this will be in the show notes, but can you tell us, for the listening audience, how they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can first find my book, Northfield, on Amazon. Just search Northfield by Kelvin Fisher, and you'll find it. Also, my website, kelvinfishermedia.com, is a great place, a great sort of central hub to find all my other links. Twitter and Instagram and Facebook as well all have that same tag, kelvinfishermedia.com. So if you search that, you should hopefully find my stuff. And yeah, I encourage you to do that. I put out content and post links to podcasts and things I do, such as this. So please consider checking it out if you're interested.
Okay, and you can find us. Are you ready for the mockery, Doc? While I read this out, I
Always.
just want to make sure you're ready.
Mocking you,
All
I'm
right, you can
always
find.
on point.
All right, you can find us on our website at anchor.fm/blasters tech and tech blades, anchor.fm/blasters tech and tech blades. You can follow us on the Twitters over at twitter.com/SF_fantasy_show, Sierra Foxtrot _fantasy_show. You can email us at blastersandbladespodcast@gmail.com. Send all of your hate mail to Cisca@gmail.com.
Hey,
Remember to tell her that Pern is not fantasy. It is, or is not science fiction. It is fantasy. So we'll set her
JR,
straight.
go back to counting.
Yes.
Go back to counting.
I'm not the accountant. That's Larry Correa. You can follow us on Blasters and Blades Facebook group at facebook.com/Blasters and Blades podcast. You can support the show over at anchor.fm/Blasters tech and tech blades, for as little as $1 a month or any derivation of dollars therein. You can also support us at
Clearly, Larry is an accountant, but not ours. So please do, because JR is doing it and he's not as good with numbers.
No, I had to take all my shoes and socks off to make this happen. But you can support the show also on buymeacoffee.com/author J.R. Handley. Be sure to put in the comment section that's for the podcast. I will promise that we will keep Doc and Nick Garber duly intoxicated so the shenanigans will continue, and I will be your sober driver.
He only gets booze when he shows.
This is true, and the Department of Homeland Security has him busy chasing Sasquatch, but we weren't supposed to talk about that, so I should probably stop right there. But I'm not saying he's looking for Yetis, but I'm not saying it either. All right. All right, Doc, you can bring us home.
Thank you for spending some of your precious time with us and meeting Calvin Fisher. For Nick Garber, J.R. Handley, I'm Cisca. This was a Blasters and Blades podcast. We'll be back next week or somewhere at the same time, approximately, where we indulge our love of nerd culture, cheesy jokes, Pern sci-fi, JR's craziness, and hopefully maybe he'll learn how to do numbers.
1, 2, 4, 9. Yep, I'm good.
Yeah, okay.